I'm excited because we're currently in a series on the book of Daniel. Every year, I try to spend time in our service kind of walking through a book. Now, we can't always cover every chapter in a book, but we try to really sit with a book, and I love doing the books that are kind of harder to understand. I like a good, complicated story. I like difficult theology. You all know this about me already. And I love to just sort of like dive into it and kind of unpack stuff that's maybe confusing. And Daniel and the book of Revelation are certainly examples of this. Has anyone tried reading the second half of Daniel or the book of Revelations? I know it's going to sound strange because I'm a pastor, but I'm going to go ahead and say I don't recommend it. It's not a great read. It's very confusing and it's very difficult. It's the only two books in our Bible that fall into the category of apocalyptic literature. Now, in our cultural understanding, apocalyptic literature means what? Zombies, end of the world, pandemic, apocalypse. Do you know what apocalypse actually means in the Greek? Unveiling. Revelation. To reveal something. And so that's where the name gets. It became popular in our culture to refer to it as end times because so many people interpret the unveiling as a picture of the end times, and so they became synonymous. But it just means to pull back the curtain. So this literature has a singular purpose. We live in a world of very mundane things. Maybe it doesn't always feel mundane, but it's people doing people things. And the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel is meant to sort of cut the curtain that separates us from the divine and pull it back a little bit and look at it. And so when you read it, you're like, oh, that's what it looks like? Well, this is crazy. It doesn't really look like that. It's metaphors, because metaphors is the only way we can understand the divine. And so it's this picture of wild beasts and thrones and lampposts that, sea of glass, all this weird stuff that's supposed to awaken our senses to what's on the other side. So it's revealing what is otherwise hidden. You have to kind of think about it like the ancient temple in Jerusalem. In the temple, there were different stages, and the Holy of Holies, which was the center of the temple, represented the very presence of God. Which you have to think, in the ancient world, they viewed the very presence of God as, God is bigger than the universe. So try containing the very God of the universe into like a tiny little living space. And I got some 90 kids here. Aladdin, anyone? And that's what it's like. And so God is contained in this Holy of Holies, and God is profound, and only the priest could go into the Holy of Holies. But we read the story of when Jesus was crucified, and that curtain, this very thick protective curtain to protect us from the presence of God, it's what? It's torn. And what's in the Holy of Holies is revealed. This is Revelation. We get to see what's on the other side. We get to experience the very nature of God. And now we have access. And that's what Daniel does, and that's what Revelation does, and that's what we're invited to do, to look behind the curtain. And each of these books, they take place in the shadow of empires. So the book of Daniel takes place actually in the shadow of a couple of empires. The Empire of Babylon and the Empire of Persia, or the Iranian Empire. And the book of Revelation takes place much later in the shadow of the Roman Empire. And that's what happens. When empires rule the world, there's this need for a divine perspective. Because when things are going well and everyone's living in harmony, which is not the way of the empire, it's fine. Who cares? We don't need to see the bigger picture. But when people are feeling lost, and when Christians or people of God are feeling beaten or oppressed, when the hungry are going hungry and the hurting are left to hurt, that's when we what's going on here? What's the bigger picture here? And it's in those times of empires that God brings this sort of special revelation. So before we go any further, I want to define what I mean by empire. I've been throwing this word around a lot over the last couple of weeks as we've walked through Daniel. Daniel is a book about empires. But I realized I hadn't really defined it. I realized that when I watched a podcast from Brian Zod, who does define it, and I was like, oh, that would probably be good to share with you guys. So Brian Zod is a Christian thinker and leader, and in a recent podcast, he defines empire. I will tell you that he is talking about America. You can decide for yourself if you feel like America fits the definition of an empire. That's between you and somebody, I don't know. But this is a pretty good theological definition of what we mean when we say empire. Can we play that video?
And by empire, I'm not just throwing out an empty word. Here's what I mean by empire. Empires are, and I'm really working mostly from Scripture here, empires are rich, powerful nations who believe they have a divine right to rule other nations and a manifest destiny to shape history according to their agenda. Empires are large, influential nations that have metastasized into an empire, and they think they should rule the world. The Bible acknowledges the reality of nations and is comfortable with that there will be many, many nations in the world, and the Scriptures don't have any vision for that not being the case. But the Scriptures also have a sustained critique of empire. You can find it in Genesis, but especially in Exodus. It's now and then throughout the prophets, especially in Daniel, into the New Testament, and then reaches a grand crescendo with the book of Revelation, which is really a prophetic critique of the Roman Empire and thus all empire. The reason that empire is so problematic is that what empires claim for themselves, divine right to rule other nations, manifest destiny to shape history according to their agenda, is the very thing that the Father promises to the Son. And so they begin to encroach upon the lordship of Jesus Christ. That's why in Christian context, then the temptation is to conflate the two and to say, oh no, we are doing this for the sake of Christ. We are helping Christ rule the world.
Brian says that empires are rich and powerful nations that believe they have a divine right to rule others, shaping history according to their agenda. They control the narrative. And the Bible is very critical of empires. Nations are fine. Throughout Scripture, it's like many nations will know God, or bless the nations. There's not a critique of individual nations and cultures and people groups. In fact, the Tower of Babel says that's how it should be. But empires, where you start controlling other people, is when God begins to critique it, and Scripture begins to critique it. Because empire, at its root, is a form of political gluttony. Because gluttony is more than just having an unhealthy relationship with food, of course. It's when we're hungry for more, and you want to consume everything around you, and you can't stop, and you keep wanting to consume. And a nation becomes an empire when it is hungry and it keeps consuming more and more nations around it. So if you look at the empires during the time of Daniel, the book that we're studying right now, they're slowly consuming each other. In fact, I found a time lapse of a map that shows the way in which empires were shaped sort of during this time in the Middle East, during the Babylonian Empire, eventually the Persian. Now, it's using some other names for them, but the empires you'll see in this include the Babylonian, eventually the Persian, which is also the Iranian, and a couple of others with names. But I just want to watch 30 seconds of 240 years of empires, okay, during this time. Let's watch that video. So you hear the green there is Assyria. They take over Israel, and then you see Babylon pop up and then fall and then pop up, and now it's Assyria. And you have a few other empires that kind of take shape over time, and then Babylon, boom, shoot, it takes over really quick. And then you see the blue one, that's the Persian Empire. No, the Medes Empire, now the Persian Empire. They have a significant influence. And then from there it continues. Eventually there's the Greek, and eventually there's the Roman, and so there's 30 seconds of 240 years of history in the Middle East. And Daniel lived through one of these. according to the stories. He served multiple kings, and he served during two different empires. In chapter 5 today, we'll look at him at part of the Babylonian Empire. And then in chapter 6, which we won't have time for, but it's one you're familiar with, it's the story of Daniel in the lion's den. It's during the Persian Empire. And so he serves the kings of two different empires. So the empires change, but the people of God keep being faithful. And I want you to hold on to that, because that's kind of the whole point of the book, that empires will come and go. But the people of God keep doing what we do in the midst of all of it. So with that, let's look at Daniel chapter 5. Let's spend some time in the scripture today. We're going to look at Daniel 5. We're going to be reading from the NIV. You can follow along in the pew. The Bible's in your pews. If you're a visual learner, they'll also be on the screen. And it starts out like this. Daniel chapter 5, 1 through 4. King Belshazzar. This is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, however you say his name. And he gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. So the empire throws a party for itself. Very empire of them. And it's opulent, right? It's excess. It's overwhelming. It wasn't just like a small dinner party with some friends. He had 1,000 nobles. You gotta think how many tables that would take. Gallons of wine. See, the first sin of the empire is this gluttony. And it plays out in how they think about nations. It plays out how they think about banquets. They just want more and more and more. And this is the fundamental weakness of empires. The empire is never satisfied. It always wants more and bigger and better, and we're going to make it great once again. And this leads us to our first tool in resisting an empire. Because if you fall into the trap of the empire's way of thinking, then you too will get on the bandwagon, give me more and more and more. So the way we resist the empire is by doing the opposite. By learning to be content. Pause there for a second, just think about this. If you're wondering what you can do right now to make the world a better place, this is one thing you can do. Be happy with what you have and don't seek out any more. Just be okay with it. Contentment is resistance. It's what's going to change the way we think about the environment. It's going to change the way we fuel the empires of our world. I know people who have given up Amazon because they don't want to keep fueling that empire. Contentment is resistance. I know people who hold on to their cars longer than they need to. Well, I don't need a new car. I'll keep the car that I have. Reduce, reuse. Contentment is resistance. In fact, last year we raised money to fix up our playground, and I was thinking about it today. We probably could have just raised more money and built the coolest, most amazing playground in the whole neighborhood, but that's not who we are. Reduce and reuse. So yeah, we're going to keep our old wooden playground, and it's going to be safer. We're getting rid of the hanging nails, parents, okay? We're replacing the ramp. It's going to have, we're fixing up what we have. Contentment is a form of resistance. And opulence is nothing more than giving the empire exactly what it wants. There's this popular saying that goes like this. We as people of faith need to learn to live simply so that others can simply live. Another popular phrase that captures this: poverty exists not because we cannot feed the poor, but because we cannot satisfy the rich. Contentment is resistance. But the rich, they hold these big banquets, thousands of people, and that's not all. Look what happens next, verse 2. This is how gluttony plays out in power. While Belshazzar was drinking his wine, so he's feeling a little tipsy. And we all make great decisions in those moments. He's drinking his wine. He says, "Bring me the gold and silver goblets." I'm assuming that's how he said it. That Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood and stone. Empires are still praising the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron and wood. What can we take from this world and get out of this world? What can we gain from this world instead of what we can give back? But there's actually something deeper going on here. See, this is how Babylon would conquer other nations. This is sort of Empire 101. This is how you want to become an empire, this is how you do it. You don't just defeat other nations. You have to humiliate them. That's gluttony. It's like, oh, it's not good enough just to defeat you. We need to make you look horrible. So this is what Babylon would do. Babylon, when they would defeat another nation, they would go into their temples, the temples of that nation, and they would take their idols and bring them to Babylon. Now, in Judaism, they weren't supposed to worship idols. Didn't mean they didn't. But they weren't supposed to worship idols. So in their temple, there weren't idols, but there were these sacred objects that they used in worship. Be like our not even close, but similar to like communion cups, things like that. But it was used in the Jewish worship, and so that was the closest thing to their idols, so to speak. And so they took those to Babylon. And then in this banquet, he's like, hey, let's use those sacred goblets, those cups that are so fancy and that were set apart to be used for God, and let's drink wine at our banquet. This happens throughout history. Violence is like addictive. And when countries become violent, they just can't help themselves, and it just goes down, and it just makes it worse. And it's not even about defeating people, or it's about humiliating them. There's lots of examples. One that I was reflecting on this week is just the history in America and how we treated Native Americans. I read one story where they defeated a tribe. American soldiers defeated a tribe of Native Americans, and you'd think that would be enough. We won. Woohoo! Yay! We won. No. They take their body parts and they parade them through the tribe's village to humiliate them. Trail of Tears. There's something about empire that's just so hungry for violence, glutton for violence. It's like, no, I can't just defeat you, I have to humiliate you. And we know from this story that God's not interested in that. God's heart is broken over that every time a nation tries to humiliate or hurt other nations, other people groups. Every time, God's heart is broken. And we see in this story what happens. If God could have when God has the final say, it's this great little, it's in the next verse, it's verse 5, and it says, suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. And the king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. Okay, the king is freaked out because he knows he crossed the line. Like, he's aware of it. That's what we're kind of like supposed to get from this story. He knows that he's done, and now something divine is happening. Now, this king believes in lots of different gods. He doesn't really know what the warning is, but he knows that some god is upset with him. He crossed the line, most likely the Jewish god, because he's desecrating their stuff at this particular thing. And but you know the saying, the writing's on the wall? This is the story. So there you go. Anyone else like look up word origins or phrase origins? I do that all the time. I'm like, when did we start saying that? Well, we started saying that when we read this story. The writing was on the wall. And when people go too far or too horrible, the writing's on the wall. We talked about how the empire's one weakness is it's so gluttonous it'll eventually consume itself. And the king knows it. And he knows he's done something wrong. And so this is what he says. Next verse, he says, the king summoned the enchanters, the astrologers, and the diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple, have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. You know, the empire will tempt you with three things: fame, you get that purple robe; gold and riches, and power. But you know, that's all the empire can offer you is fame, riches, and power. They can't offer you anything else. So he's offering him everything he has. He said, magicians, wise men, tell me what this means, and I'll give you fame. I'll make you look great. I'll give you wealth. I'll give you power. Now, none of his wise men can figure it out. This is the main point of Daniel. They can't figure it out. But someone's like, hey, you should ask Daniel. He was in previous chapters. His dad worked with him. He's pretty smart. You should ask him. He might know. So they go get Daniel. And they bring Daniel in, and the king offers him this. He offers him the same thing. You can read it in the verses. And this is how he responds. By the time Daniel shows up, verse 17, he says, then Daniel answered the king, you may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I'll read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Why would Daniel not accept those gifts? Well, it's simple, because contentment is not just resistance, but freedom. When you're fine with what you have, the empire can no longer influence you. It has no power over you. Contentment is freedom from influence. It's freedom from control. When you don't need what the empire has to offer, you can't be controlled by what the empire wants you to do, and you're finally free. So Daniel does tell him, the king, what it means, but not because of the rewards. But before he does, he uses his time in front of the king to speak truth to power. So here's what he says, verse 22 and 23. It says, but you, Belshazzar, before this, he kind of says, here's everything your dad had to learn, and for whatever reason, you didn't learn it, and so now you have to learn it for yourself. It says, but you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled yourself, though you knew all this. Instead, you have set yourself up against the Lord of heaven. You had the goblets from his temple brought to you, and you and your nobles, your wives and your concubines drank wine from them. So this is the core. Daniel says, you knew better. You knew. You should have known. Your dad had to learn all these lessons. Weren't you paying attention? And then he goes on. He doesn't stop there. He says, you praise the gods of silver and gold, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, as the empire does, which cannot see or understand, but you did not honor the God who holds in his hand your life in all of your ways. At the heart of this, Daniel is critiquing the king. Here's what empires can do. They can take someone's life, and they can refrain from taking someone's life. This is what Daniel says earlier in the chapter. Empires can take someone's life or refrain from taking someone's life. And Daniel's like, that makes you feel real powerful. But here's the truth of, it's actually not. It's like really easy. It's not complicated to take someone's life. I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying anyone can do it. It's boring. That's all the empire can do. Take someone's life or choose not to take it. He says, you forgot God is able to give life. And God's people are meant to give life. And bringing life into a world that's addicted to violence, that's hard. That's difficult. It's like a scenario where there's a car accident and the police show up and so do the paramedics. The police can stop traffic, maybe arrest someone if they're to blame. But, and I know this is a metaphor, so it only goes so far. I'm sure police have more training than this. I'm not, whatever. But, that's what they do. They can arrest or they can protect. The paramedic's the one who's going to get down on the floor, breathe life into somebody, perform CPR, bandage the wounds, and bring life. And he says, you empires are here. You think you have so much power because you have power over people to take life. But my God is here because God can bring life. And we are meant to be people who bring life. If you do something in this world, if you do something today to bring life in a broken world, then you are more powerful than the kings and the dictators and the presidents of empires. And so with that, Daniel explains it. He kind of got off his soapbox, He's like, I have your attention. Let me tell you how horrible you are. And he says, now I'll tell you what it means, king. And he says, the inscription that was written was Mene, Tekel, Parsin. Just FYI, I have a slide for this, hopefully. Mene, Tekel, Parsin, second line there. Everyone has their own theory on where this came from. Generally speaking, the best we can do is, this is not a real language. This is nonsense. And I do want to just pause there and say, most of the visions, when we pull back the curtain, appear to be nonsense, okay? And the whole point of Daniel was that people couldn't understand it, and they didn't know what it meant, and it took somebody sort of like set apart by God to explain it. So I just want you to keep that in mind when your uncle self-publishes his book on Revelation, all right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's really not for everyone. Like, it's intentionally not easy to understand. The whole point of the story is, like, most people don't get it. And so if someone's like, no, I totally get it, you're like, okay, yeah. Just because you came up with something that was clever does not mean it is true. All right? So, but Daniel's set apart by God for whatever reason to be able to explain it. He says, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. And Peres, which sounds like Persians, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. These are two different empires you saw on the map. This is financial language. Daniel is saying to the king, you've been audited. And your books don't line up. You've spent way more than you've brought in. You've consumed more than you should have. God's checked the books, they don't add up, and you're going to lose the kingdom. And he does at the end of the chapter. The next chapter is a new empire. I want to go back to this video we watched earlier. Can we just watch this, put this just kind of on loop? 30 seconds of empires shifting in the Middle East. 240 years of empires. How many empires rose to power and crumbled into dust in that just 30-second clip? I mean, it'd be hard to count them. There's so many that just pop up and go away and pop up and go away. Now, to be fair, that's not how it would feel if we were living it. Imagine waking up every day. Some of you are like, I don't have to imagine. I know what it feels like. Imagine waking up every day inside of the anxiety, the instability, the injustice of shifting nations and empires. You'd have no idea how long it would last or how it would end. And if someone came along and said, hey, don't worry about it, this will all be over in a few decades. Like, that's not going to help that much because you're still suffering today. This 30-second clip represents 240 years of empire building and collapse. That's equal to 87,000 days. That's 87,000 sleepless nights of those who are suffering under the empire's thumb. That's 87,000 mornings waking up to another news story. And each of these 87,000 days is made up of their own 86,000 seconds. Each second a moment. So we can step back and we say, 30 seconds of world history. Look how fast empires rise and fall. But when you're living in it in real time, it's not how it feels. But when we look at it, we zoom out. We look at the bigger picture, you're like, wait a second. These are just a blip in the story of history. That's what happens when you zoom out and look at the world. When you look at current events from a distance, that's, the bird's eye view. That's what it looks like when you pull back the curtain and remember that the world we live in, the days and the moments that make up our life, are not the whole picture. See, that's the gift of apocalyptic literature like Daniel and Revelation. It's not about predicting the future or decoding cryptic symbols. It's about broadening our vision. It's God's invitation to zoom out, to see our present pain and struggle in the context of something much bigger than ourselves. So if you're reading and you're studying Daniel or Revelation, or you have a friend who is, and they're trying to match every image with a specific historical event, they've missed the point. The point is to zoom out and realize that, oh, there's stuff going on here that I don't understand. See, the books aren't meant to satisfy our curiosity about timelines. They're meant to awaken in us awe, to remind us that the affairs of this world can feel overwhelming in the moment, but when you step out and you catch a bigger vision, like, oh, there's still a bigger story happening here, and God is not done with us. And God is bigger than the current events. Have any of you seen the sequoia trees? The big ones? I have not, but it is on my bucket list. And I like to imagine what it would be like to see them. They're big, right? I mean, they're like, if your government was oppressing you, standing at the foot of a sequoia tree isn't going to help much with that, right? But if your government is oppressing you and you're feeling overwhelmed and discouraged, and you make it to see them, and you're standing there and maybe it's not the trees, maybe it's the Grand Canyon, maybe it's something else, but you ever get that moment where you're just kind of have to catch your breath? You're like, oh man, this world is grander than I thought. We were hiking in Hocking Hills yesterday. I was like, why don't we come here more often? It's not that far. And it kind of like there were some moments where the light was coming through and it was like casting shadows on this rock wall that stood as tall as one of those probably. And I'm like, man. And you're just kind of overwhelmed with the awe of it. And they kind of take your breath away. Does that change the world? No, but it can do a lot to change you, to leave us in a sense of awe, to remind us that there's more in this world than the headlines and the corrupt politicians. See, wonder is the fuel of resistance because it reminds us who we are and the great struggle, that we're part of something so much bigger. Something always happens in the shadow of empires. In the story of Daniel, you have Daniel and his friends who are living faithfully for God in the shadow of empires. And they're standing up for what's right, and God is protecting them, and it's a beautiful story. Much later, in the shadow of the Roman Empire, you have the person of Jesus, who lives in the shadow of this empire and continues to love people when people tell him he shouldn't, and he continues to show compassion. He continues to love and change the world through these small acts. There's something about the shadow of empires where God births something new that brings life. See, what's funny about the sequoia is that the seed is, of course, very small. And the Bible has a few things to say about small seeds and the faith that's the size of them. You have this tiny little seed, but I found out something really interesting this week about these seeds is they exist inside these cones, and the seed can be stuck inside a cone, like this green one, for decades. And it's only released occasionally. It can be released because of an insect or a bird agitates it, or because the heat agitates it, or even more commonly, fire agitates it. And so, literally, the seeds of these giant trees are born out of fire and agitation. I believe, and my challenge to you, wherever you find yourself, is that if you feel like the world is falling apart, is it possible that God is raising you up to be light in the midst of that? Our favorite pastor, Fred Rogers, said it like this: when I was a boy and I would see scary things in the news, because FYI, scary things in the news is not a new thing, my mother would say to me, look for the helpers. You will always find people who are helping. Friends, I want you to hear this. If I lost you halfway through, because for whatever reason, I would just come back to me. I want you to hear this. Because I believe this, and I think this is essential for our community and for the church. The darker it gets, the more important it is we shed light. Do you hear what I'm saying? Don't give in to the temptations of the empire and their endless news cycles and their polarizing social media feeds and all the things that will discourage and distract you. Be aware, stay engaged, but be a light. Love the people in front of you. Love the people you disagree with. Make a difference in small ways wherever you are. And trust God to use that for something big. Will you pray with me? God, we give you thanks. Instill within us a heart for justice. Instill within us a heart for peace. Make us peacemakers and violence disruptors. Give us courage to be your light in a world that is often dark. In a world that is often violent, help us be loving. In a world that is gluttonous for more and more and more, help us be content. Help us be the change we want to see in the world. We ask this in your name. Amen.